Well, hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show here on YouTube on the 24th of June, 2019. 6 days and half the year is over already. Where is it going? It goes so quickly. I guess we're having way too much fun. If we weren't having fun, it would seem like it was going much slower. But we've got a very busy night ahead with showers and thunderstorms and some severe weather. We're going to touch upon that. The Pacific tropics might be waking up a little bit. We'll take a look at what's going on there. We'll even look at the Atlantic side, which is very silent at the moment. And by the way, if we wind up not seeing any named storm here during the month of June, it's not unusual. I think the stat was, almost half the Junes wind up with no tropical storm, no named storm forming during the month of June. So to see it quiet in June, and actually to see it quiet even for a good chunk of the month of July, would not be that unusual. I've just been saying how unusual it is that the Pacific side has been so quiet. Now, let's run through the severe weather and take a look at where this first week of summer is leading us. Because this weekend was so wonderful. Low humidity, bone dry in the northeast down into at least the northern mid-Atlantic states. And in fact, at some point over the weekend, and actually that dry air had pushed down even further south. We might actually get a repeat performance of that later this coming weekend and into next week. And we'll get into that when we talk about the long range. But first things first is a busy round of severe weather developing in the Appalachians, particularly in the central Appalachians, where we have an enhanced risk of severe weather and two working severe thunderstorm watches that are up from the Georgia-Tennessee line, with the watch covering either side of Tennessee and western North Carolina, running straight northeastward through eastern Kentucky, westernmost Virginia, and then looks like the whole state of West Virginia, southeast Ohio, into southwestern Pennsylvania. We also have an area of slight risk in southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, and a small portion of northeastern Iowa. And we have another working severe thunderstorm watch that has just popped up in West Texas, where we have a slight risk being indicated there. Always remember, it is 6:02 Eastern Time. If you're watching this on a replay later on this evening or overnight, that obviously the satellites and radars that you will see and much of the current weather that we'll be talking about is dated. So you want to go to your local National Weather Service office forecast page, and you can access that by going to weather.gov. One of the things that we are going to see this week is, even though there will be episodes of severe weather, things are really calming down to some degree. So the rainfall amounts are going to be subject to convective developments, and they are subject to be higher than what WPC is forecasting, the Weather Prediction Center. In some areas, if you get caught under a thunderstorm that sits over you for a couple of hours, it could certainly prove problematic. But in terms of widespread general rainfall here, we're not seeing a whole lot. There's a max area there in southwest Florida showing several inches or more. Looks like a small bubble there right around Naples, Sarasota. We are also going to see up to about an inch or two throughout the west, let's call it the central Gulf states, from East Texas over into Alabama and the Florida Panhandle. Maybe an inch or two of rain possible in the Northeast, with what's coming through for tomorrow, Tuesday morning, and the possibility of some pop-up storms during the rest of the week, and a stronger cold front coming through on Saturday. Along the western lakes and the northern plains, you're seeing, again, maybe an inch or two. The west, of course, especially as you go into the southwest, is bone dry. But we're not seeing any kind of widespread 5-inch plus rainfalls that we saw in the last several weeks or longer, covering the southern plains and into the Ohio Valley. Seems like things, at least from that standpoint, are relaxing. You are definitely seeing a relaxation of the very high amplified pattern that we've had, so that explains a lot of this. And with more of a northwest flow that's going to, or a west-northwest flow that's going to dominate the weather later this week and into this weekend, your weather systems tend to be weaker. So you're going to wind up with much less from the standpoint of rainfall. Now, on the satellite loop tonight, on the U.S. satellite loop, a couple of things. First off, you'll notice, by the way, some shadiness there in the western Gulf of Mexico. That is Saharan dust. I hadn't looked at the satellite loop this morning, and I got a message from David Schwartz, who's one of our semi-regulars here on our YouTube channel, pointing this out, and indeed correct. You are seeing Saharan dust in there going through the Caribbean and into the Gulf of Mexico. The dry air, when we show you the satellite, the tropical satellite in the Atlantic, you'll see how bone dry it is in much of Africa. So you would not expect to see disturbances yet. We got to wake that part, wake it up, and start to see the monsoonal rains begin there later in July, and then you start to get these weather disturbances that move off the African coast and develop. But right now, that's not happening, nor would you expect it to be. Meanwhile, back on the mainland, you do have, you see that twisting there, that turning that's going on in the western lakes. That's part of this deep western trough that came in that is starting to lift up and out, or at least part of it is. Part of that trough is going to lift out west of the lakes. The rest of it is going to drop back down off the coast of the Pacific Northwest, and that is going to essentially de-amplify the upper air pattern across the U.S. And you also can see the trailing arm that is moving eastward. We have a warm front that's swinging east. That's going to be impacting the Northeast on Tuesday. In my neck of the woods, it's going to be for the morning commute, eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England. We still have some downpours and thunderstorms. There was a big area of rain and thunderstorms this morning that moved through the southern plains and the Gulf states and dropped southward to right along the Gulf of Mexico. And that's that band that you see running pretty much from Brownsville to about New Orleans. And some of that moisture is pulling northward up northeastward into the Appalachians tonight. Dry in the plains, dry in the central and southern Rockies, dry in the southwest, dry along the immediate east coast and down to Florida, and also up in northern for the northeast and in the northern mid-Atlantic right now, mostly dry. There are some exceptions in parts of the northern and mid-Atlantic that we're going to get to. I know because Robert Brown, who did mention that he's got some thunderstorms nearby, and the radar is going to verify this. So what's happening is that we are transitioning over from that gorgeous dry air mass that we had pretty much all weekend long to one that's going to be much more humid. And when we look at the temperatures as of 6 p.m., you can see that for example, over Long Island and up into Connecticut, you've got dew points that are still down in the 50s, and there's a few places that have crept up into the low 60s, but you've got a lot of spots that are still in the 50s. And then when you move further southwest, and not that far southwest, you start to get into these 70-plus dew points across southern Pennsylvania, down into Maryland, actually quite soupy in Baltimore with an 82 temperature and a dew point of 75. So you've got dew points here all in the low and even middle 70s. So we're actually seeing some renegade storms that have formed out ahead of the main area that is out to the west. I'm going to see if I can add the radar here, and we can look at some of these cells. And in fact, right near Fredericksburg, as of 6 o'clock, we've got a fairly strong thunderstorm working there. Fredericksburg is 73 with a dew point of 73. 100% relative humidity, and they must have been pouring there when the core of that cell moved overhead. And we're seeing developments extending across Chesapeake Bay and into Delaware, although the strongest cell is that area right around Fredericksburg and south of Washington, D.C. And then when we go back further to the west, you start to see the radar echoes that are starting to set up with potential severe. Actually, we already have some severe thunderstorm warnings that have already been posted by some of this stuff that is running through the central Appalachians. The area that is developing here through Ohio and in West Virginia, I mean, all of this is going to eventually play out and move northeastward so that it will get into the areas from eastern PA to southern New England and eventually moving their way up into northern New England. The radar is showing that moisture is trying to move in areas in the Northeast, but a lot of this is, in fact, almost all of it is not reaching the ground based on weather observations that I've been looking at all afternoon. The radars would have implied that at least some places would have been seeing some light rain. Scranton, I think, was the only spot that I saw that had some light rain, and there might have been a few others, but for the most part, this is all aloft, not reaching the ground. But it is really indicating what is happening, which is a gradual saturation of the atmosphere. And you can see also on the northeast close-up satellite loop, you have these clouds arcing northwest, southeast. So we're basically at the top of the ridge here. The top of the ridge is right along the east coast and getting ready to move eastward as the trough to the west starts to push in. But remember, that western trough is not going to push very much further to the east. It's going to lift more to the north, which is going to leave much of the east in a very warm and humid environment for the rest of this week once we work through whatever we work through shower-wise. Now, here's what's going on radar-wise at the moment. Here are the cells. Let's give it a fresh look here. This is running about 15 minutes or so behind 611, so this radar is probably from about 550, 555. And you can see the heavy cell that's down south of the Washington, D.C. area. You also can see the echoes that are showing up in the Hudson Valley and over southwest Connecticut. Again, last I looked, none of this was reaching the ground anywhere, and a few little dots there in northern New Jersey also not reaching the ground. But this stuff here definitely reaching the ground. You've got some very strong storms moving through eastern Ohio right now and also through eastern Kentucky. There's a solid line here, eastern Kentucky down to eastern Tennessee with some stray cells running well ahead of it. There's also a little bit of a second line here in northern Georgia that is moving eastward. So all of this goes back up to the upper the upper low that is fairly obvious in Wisconsin. There you can see the rotation of the echoes in a counterclockwise fashion. There's some strong thunderstorms working their way across Wisconsin, eastern Wisconsin, heading for Milwaukee and Green Bay, and also back through northern Illinois. They seem to have exited out of eastern Iowa. And then we've still got activity going on throughout a good chunk of Minnesota. And again, this trough that is in the west, producing some showers and storms across the Dakotas and down in through Montana, and now down to the Gulf states with what's left. This was such a huge area this morning, and it's really a shadow of its former self, as now most of the showers and storms are offshore in the Gulf states, but you also do have stuff going on inland. Southernmost Florida, south of Miami, you're seeing some development there, some cells developing and moving southwestward, but there's nothing going on throughout much of the rest of the state except for what's right along the Georgia, Alabama, Florida state line near that triple point where we're seeing some showers and storms. So let's take you through what's going on short range. So let's go short range here with respect to tomorrow morning. This is the transition over into a warm tropical air mass, so you're going to see some of this activity with regards to the showers and storms in Ohio and Kentucky and Tennessee are going to lift northeastward, and looks like it'll bring through some cells here. So this is 5 a.m., 6 a.m., 7 a.m., 8 a.m., 9, 10, 11. well, it only goes out to as far as 10. Okay, the area seems to slow down a little bit here. I'm going to make sure I got the latest one. We got the new 21Z HRRR. And, all right, so here we go. This is at 2 a.m., 3, 4, 5 a.m. That's as far as we go. So the new, this is 4 a.m., I'm sorry. So just go back one run. So it looks like it might be just a shade faster on the new run. We'll see where it takes us. But the bottom line is that we're going to see most of this occur during the morning commute. I think it lasts maybe at most an hour or two. Some heavier downpours in there, maybe a little lightning and thunder as well. And then we're going to switch off into that very warm and humid air mass that will be taking over. Now, my feeling as far as the rest of this week goes is that it is going to be very warm. I use 90 degrees as what my definition of what I think hot is. As far as humidity goes, what you're going to see is that some days are going to be more humid than others. There will be a couple of days, I'm thinking Thursday in particular, where the dew points may actually come down in some areas, not all. But in terms of excessive heat and excessive humidity, this is not the kind of pattern that you're going to see this in. Now here's that. We pointed out before, you saw the arc of the ridge on the satellite loop. So if you follow the flow, it's southwest across Ohio, west at the top of this ridge, and then goes northwest over New England. So the shortwave trough that is swinging through the Great Lakes actually lifts up to the northeast. That ridge just kind of holds on there along the east coast as the trough lifts up. So you get this gradual turning of the upper winds. They go southwest to west northwest by the time we get to Thursday. So this kind of puts us in a bit of a interesting position, because the jet stream is not going to be that far away from us. The faster flow in the jet stream that'll be moving weather systems along is going to be lying just north of New York City, and then you start to get a bit of an upper high that builds into the southeast. You can see it here on the wide view. Also, the western part of this trough drops down, as we said, into the Pacific Northwest and offshore. So you go from this sort of amplified look to a de-amplified look and a much flatter west to northwest, east southeast flow. So in this type of scenario, you're going to have weather systems moving along from the northern plains into the northeast, but they're going to be weak. Every one will go by. The jet stream might lower a little bit, then come up a little bit, but it's not the type of scenario that would favor extreme heat and humidity. Yes, in the southeast and across Texas and Oklahoma and Kansas and back through New Mexico, where you're sitting underneath the upper high, it's going to get hot there, and it may get quite hot. But the northern extent of that heat is going to get somewhat limited, at least into the eastern part of the United States. Now watch what happens as we go through the weekend. If you take a look at on the upper right, not the far right, but right near where James Bay is, you're going to see an upper low drop down. This is Saturday afternoon. So suddenly you'll notice that that last height line, the one that's labeled 588, drops down to southern Virginia by Saturday evening. Now you've got a solid northwest flow, and possibly even going northwest. The upper low is strengthening in southeastern Canada and drops down into New England and off the New England coast. This is going to bring down a shot of dry air. I hesitate to call it cool air, because this time of year the air in Canada actually can get fairly warm because it is bone dry, so, and the long daylight hours. So we could actually see we'll see temperatures that will be at least close to average, but the humidity will be coming down Sunday into Monday as this upper low drops off the New England coast. It's very similar to what happened this weekend, where the trough amplifies along the East Coast. The only difference is that in this particular case, well, two differences. First of all, you don't have a deep trough coming into the Plains and Rockies. The second difference is that this trough seems to be amplified a bit further west and a bit further south. So that actually could wind up dragging drier air down into at least North Carolina in a scenario like this. And when we take a look at the dew point map going forward, you'll see what I'm talking about here. Our dew points, of course, rising up. This is for Tuesday afternoon. You still got some pockets of dry air. He's back over into the Appalachians, and that's probably a result of the upper trough that might be moving through there. You get a little bit of drying tomorrow, and the dew points are in the low 60s and upper 50s in the Appalachians and in western PA, but they're in the upper 60s as you go along the coast. And here we are for Wednesday afternoon, and dew points climbing up into the 60s, but you got the GFS actually forecasting dew points in the 50s down into the mountains of western North Carolina down into northern Georgia. So there's a bit of drier air here as you get these weak these weak troughs that go by. The dew points then shoot up a bit going into Wednesday evening, and now you've got a push down on Thursday, a little bit of dry air that comes down into New England. Not a whole lot of it, dew points in the upper 50s, but you take what you can get. At this point, also notice toward the end of the week, you start to get this expansion of 70-plus dew points in the middle and upper Mississippi Valley. And now, as we move on into Friday, we are going to, and Saturday, that's when you're going to get this next cold front. And here comes the push of 40s dew points down into southern Virginia by Monday afternoon. So we have to see where that eastern trough, how it lines up. If it's stronger and a little further west, you could certainly push that dry air further south. This particular run is kind of backed off a bit from the earlier run, which was pushing it down into South Carolina. This one is a bit more resistant in that, and it could be because of what it's doing out in the west. Perhaps the trough is further east here, and it looks like, at least in the west, on this particular run, there's more troughing coming into the west than on prior runs. So that could be the reason, and it may or may not be correct. But when we look at this through the long haul, this seems to be a recurring theme here. So as long as that's the case, you'll get the odd days where you'll see temperatures get very warm to borderline hot. But in terms of prolonged heat, it's going to be very hard to pull that off in the Northeast and down into the northern mid-Atlantic states. By the way, as we go into the weekend, you get that ridge builds up in the middle of the country up toward the Great Lakes. So you're going to see some pretty warm temperatures there, at least for a day or two. Then the ridge kind of flattens out as we move through next week. And in a pattern like this, I would not expect to see a whole lot of rain. And in fact, when we take a look, I'm going to put the radar stuff up here so you can see what the GFS, what it thinks the radar is going to look like. So whatever we get tomorrow, and that sweeps up through New England, there's a pretty good arm that goes all the way up into Maine. But after that, it really, to me, it looks like more of the pop-ups and hit-and-miss variety until you get that push for Saturday. Saturday's the day where you get this front to come through. Now, this run's really backed off on the front that is passing through Boston, New York City, Philadelphia by... it's a little slower with bringing it through. There's one that comes through on Saturday, and then there's a second push that comes in on Sunday, and that probably is the push that brings down the dry air and dew points. And looking into next week, relatively uneventful. As far as we can go, at least into Wednesday, where we do have, looks like another frontal push moving down into the Northeast and into the northern mid-Atlantic states with some showers and storms. I don't see, the one thing that would concern me is if we were to see a onshore flow pattern develop, and I just don't see it with this sort of upper air. All All right, let's take a look at the tropics because the Hurricane Center, and we're doing this on the Pacific side, if only for meteorological interests only, no threat to land, but you are beginning to finally see the intertropical convergence zone here rev up with a lot of showers and thunderstorms running from the coast of Central America westward into the tropical Pacific, and it's on the on the more western part of this envelope that low pressure is going to develop, and the Hurricane Center actually now has a 70% probability of this developing into a tropical cyclone over the next 5 days, a 50% chance in the next 2. It still looks pretty disorganized. I'm not seeing any kind of low-level turning yet, but the flow does look somewhat anticyclonic. In other words, there's an upper high aloft here, so I would think conditions are going to be conducive for development, and perhaps we may finally have the first named storm on the Pacific side. This will be one of the latest starting seasons on the Pacific side in the satellite era. It'll either be the third latest or the second latest, if my memory serves, in terms of the dates that were given by, I forgot who did, but thank you for doing that. Might have been Anthony or in terms of the start of the season, but definitely going to be among the 3 latest starting seasons. And meanwhile, in the Atlantic, which we have noted that it's been a wind shear parade for quite a while, it still is a wind shear parade in the Eastern Caribbean. You really don't have anything to speak of that looks even remotely as if something's going to come out of it. By the way, if you look on the far right, you can see Africa there and the absolute lack of activity. So we're kind of waiting for the monsoon season where you start to see these weather disturbances moving north of the equator, and they begin to move off the African coast and moving westward. But we're probably a good I would say at least 3 or 4 weeks away from getting that part of the season underway. So in the meantime, unless something flares up somewhere or we get a stalled frontal boundary, which is always possible, you get some sort of stalled frontal boundary or something that drops down into the Gulf of Mexico from the north. Sometimes that happens. You get a little trough, an upper trough, or even a low-level or mid-level system that drops down and moves over the Gulf of Mexico, and under certain conditions, you could get a tropical depression or a tropical storm to form out of that. But not seeing that happen on the satellite right now. So I am looking forward. I know Bill Huber mentioned earlier that he's having problems with the cool nights to heat up his pool. And that certainly is a problem in the Northeast. It's not the day side so much as though it's those cool nights. If you've got a pool, that unless you got a heater, it's those cool nights that'll get you. Especially when you start getting later into the month of August, when the nights start getting longer. It is a problem. But you're going to resolve that after tonight, because we're going to have some pretty, fairly warm nights ahead of us that will help. Okay. That will certainly help. Norm Roberts, hello to you, James NASCAR fan. Robert Brown, you probably have some thunderstorms nearby. You mentioned that before. They did have a special marine warning up. Europe dealing with a nasty heat wave. Daniel Fitzsimmons, thank you for reminding me because I wanted to actually talk about that. So let's come back and let's get La GFS up and go to Europe and take a look at what's happening. I haven't looked, to tell you the truth. I see a little snow there up in Norway at 198 hours. All right, hang on a second. All right, so let's first look at the upper air. Aha. Big ridge. Deep trough off the coast, down to Spain, wrapped up cutoff low, strong ridge from Africa up through western Italy, all the way up into an upper high sitting over Poland. And what happens over time? That upper high, and that's a strong one, by the way, settles over France and Spain, and there it is, that ridge moving westward over the next couple of days before it starts to flatten out and breaks down a bit early next week. So let's take a look and what kind of temperatures it gives. Let's roll back. Well, I see a lot of that pink stuff. That's not good in terms of temperatures. Okay, so these are noon and 6 p.m. temperatures. So you're seeing temperatures. I guess we're going to have to kind of guess at what the high temperatures are going to be. But the noontime temperatures in eastern France are in the middle 80s. Looks like a lot of places in the low to mid 80s for noontime. Then you go to noontime on Tuesday, you've got temperatures up into the lower 90s. So you figure another 3 hours of daytime heating, you're certainly going to be able to push it into the middle and upper 90s. Now here's your day. Wednesday, you're talking about midday temperatures in France, in Italy, and parts of Germany, up into the lower and middle 90s. 30 degrees Celsius is 86 degrees Fahrenheit. 35 is 94. So you're looking at, on Wednesday, you're going to see some areas probably go over 100 in France and Spain. That's where the center of your upper high is. And Thursday also probably going to see temperatures. This is a noontime. This is a noontime temperature here at this particular spot in southeastern France, right on the Mediterranean. Has a temperature of 40 Celsius. That's 104 Fahrenheit. 41, 105, 106. That's at noontime. Okay. So look, you want to certainly say, without trying to pick a topside number, you certainly are going to see temperatures up over 100 degrees in this part of Europe. You go up further north, though, up in England and in northern Germany and points north. It's warm, but it's not crazy warm. You see temperatures getting up into the upper 60, into the 70s, but the real heat is going to be further south of the center of that upper high. And even into Saturday, you're still seeing at noontime temperatures in Spain running well over 100 degrees, a little lower in France, starting to push some warmer air further north, because remember that ridge kind of starts to tilt more northeast, southwest as it weakens. Still holding on to the heat in Spain, southern France, and some parts of Italy on Monday, and then it relaxes a bit more as we get into Tuesday of next week. So some hope, at least, that the heat wave doesn't last for more than 4 or 5 days in the most in the areas that are going to see the maximum impact. Thank you, Dan, for mentioning that, because I actually wanted to cover that today, and I forgot. I got a lot of stuff on the board sometimes, and I really ought to get into a habit of just writing things down, because I'm getting forgetful in my young old age. Can another island ever form on Earth naturally again? One good earthquake or a volcano would take care of that, Dan. It's something that, or a hurricane for that matter, it can get rid of a few islands and carve out a few new inlets. That's always possible. Can a mesoscale convective complex system that forms over Texas move over the Gulf and form a cyclone from that? Actually, Johnny, I can't. There are instances that I can remember of systems that have developed, as you said, mesoscale complex, sort of an east-west complex, much like what looked like on the radar this morning. I've seen it happen a few times, seeing a system. If there's something going on in the higher levels of the atmosphere, where let's say it's being triggered by a mid-level trough and it drops down into the Gulf of Mexico, if it sits there long enough, you can eventually see something tropical come out of it. I have seen it happen. Certainly have seen it happen with decaying frontal boundaries that move into the Gulf or off the southeast coast, and then the front decays, and you get a wave that develops that quickly gains tropical characteristics and becomes a tropical storm. So it certainly can happen. I doubt that it's going to happen with this one, because you got so much shear going on, and plus that Saharan dust is out there, and a few other factors that are not exactly pointing to development. But sometimes you do get development from systems. Sometimes off the East Coast, there are numerous instances. It used to happen a lot more back in the 70s and 80s, and it's kind of been on a decrease since the 90s. But you would get these lows that would cut off the East Coast and then drop southward, south of North Carolina. Those systems would take about 3, 4, 5 days. They would just sit there. The jet stream would pull up, so there's nothing really to kick it out. So it just would sit there south of 35 degrees north, where the water temperatures are warm enough, and the upper low would gradually warm, and then you would get a low-level circulation that would develop, and the system would gradually become tropical. But as I said, I used to happen quite a bit in the 70s and 80s, and then it started decreasing as we've been through the 90s. I don't recall the last time that a system like that has developed, but it does happen from time to time. All right, let's leave it at that. Iron Mine, thanks for being here. Just saw you jump on mentioning Long Island thunderstorms are marching across Pennsylvania. Well, at least whatever we see tomorrow morning, we'll see what's left of what's out there tonight and see if it holds together. All right, thanks for being here tonight, everybody. Really appreciate it. Weather in 5 tomorrow morning. Probably have it up between 8 and 9 Eastern time, unless I manage to get up a bit earlier, or if the thunderstorms, if we get them, if they wake me up, there'll be an earlier weather in 5. That's 5 days in 5 minutes. It's a quick update of what's going on. It tends to be focused on the areas from eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, unless there's something major going on somewhere. And, of course, we'll have our regular YouTube live stream tomorrow night at probably at 6 o'clock. There's no Joe and Joe weather show this week. Mr. Rayo is taking some time off, and well-deserved, so I'm soloing. So it'll just be the YouTube live stream unless I feel inspired and do a solo on Facebook. But don't like to do the show without him. All right, everybody, have a great evening. Hope your weekend was great. Stay safe, and don't forget, if you've watched this on the replay, everything is dated, so make sure you check the latest radars and whatever's going on with severe weather by going to your local National Weather Service office forecast page, which you can access by going to weather.gov. Good night, everybody.